what is more heartbreaking for me currently is that I have to treat patients differently according to what they are able to afford. The bureaucracy has almost killed academic research and has made the expenses of developing a drug so high that when it reached the clinic, they put too high prices. And that's why I'm saying the whole model is broken. It is not right that a simple pill costs $10,000 a month. We have to aim higher for people that live with advanced cancer, or we will never make it a curable disease. There's nothing that can justify that price.
Welcome to the Health Equity Podcast. My name is Iyer, and I lead the Access to Medicine Foundation. Today, we're going to be unpacking the role of access to medicine in low and middle income countries for women. And I'm joined today by a world-renowned medical oncologist and president of the Advanced Breast Cancer Global Alliance, ABC Global Alliance, Dr. Fatima Cardoso. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Jay. Nice to be here.
As part of the Health Equity Through Her Lens campaign, this conversation will explore the urgent need for addressing gender disparities for women and girls in healthcare, with a particular focus on access to medicine for breast cancer. Dr. Cardoso brings a wealth of experience through her experience in the ABC Global Alliance and the European Society for Medical Oncology, and we'll unpack the systemic gaps in cancer care for women, and especially in low and middle income countries, and the pivotal role the pharmaceutical industry plays in bridging these gaps. So around the world, women and girls face very unique barriers in access to medicine itself. From your perspective, why is it so critical right now to address these barriers? What is the opportunity?
Well, I would say that it has been critical to address these barriers for a long time. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we've been talking about it for probably decades already, and the progress has been very slow. There's a lot of reasons for that. We have to realize that women are like the basis of the society, the pillars of society. A lot of what keeps society working is done, let's say, backstage. And those types of activities are usually led by women. Women are the pillars of the households. They provide the care for children. They provide the care for elders. Most of these work are unpaid. And so sometimes I feel that they are unseen and unheard. And of course, there are always cultural reasons, and these are different from country to country. But overall, in the majority of the countries in the world, this is the situation. And we keep fighting for gender equity, or at least for some sort of equilibrium in what happens in society between the two genders, but the reality is much different in many different aspects of the society. And when we think about the rights, the basic rights, of which health is one of them, access to or the right to have a good health in all its aspects of health, women and girls are still underserved as opposed to men and boys. And this is, I would say, of course, stronger in low middle income countries, but it is not exclusive of low middle income countries. And from my experience working in this field for so long, I would say that disparities have increased in this last decade, for example. They have not decreased. No. We would have hoped that they would have decreased, but I think the gaps between countries, but also within each country, with the underserved populations within each country, they have increased, at least in this last decade.
So, I mean, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're tackling as an oncologist and as an advocate? And tell me a little bit about also your background in what got you to become an oncologist and an advocate for advanced breast cancer.
Well, that's a long story already, but I've always wanted to be a doctor since I was a kid. There was a time where I thought between medicine and veterinary, but then I decided to go for medicine. But when I went to medical school, it was not my intention to become an oncologist. I wanted to be a pediatrician. And then during the medical school, let's say I found out about cancer and the biology of cancer, and that has really became something very exciting for me, something I really wanted to learn more about it. And then by the end of medical school, one of my best friends had breast cancer. So that was the kind of the last bit of the circumstances that have led me to choose oncology. And very early on in my career, I have focused on breast cancer, at least on women's cancer. Initially, I used to treat also gynecological cancers, in particular ovarian cancer. And then in oncology today, it's almost impossible to treat all kinds of cancer because the speed of evolution is so big, and new treatments and new ways of addressing the same cancer, that for us to be very good and expert in the field, you have to narrow your field.
Right.
And so throughout the years, I've been narrowing it, moved from women's cancer to breast cancer. And since the beginning of the 2000s, so already quite a long time ago, I have decided to focus more on the needs of metastatic or advanced breast cancer patients. This came because at that time, 2 surveys were presented. And those surveys showed the same thing, that this group of breast cancer patients felt totally alone and abandoned. Abandoned by everybody, by the physicians, the researchers, and even the breast cancer advocacy groups.
Right.
Because the focus was, as you may remember, the pink movement. And it's extremely important. The pink movement changed oncology,
right,
and established the role of advocacy and patients in oncology. It was the first one, and then inspired all the other groups. And they focus, and correctly so, on early detection, screening. But by doing that exclusively, they tend to forget those that, despite everything, have advanced cancer.
Right.
And at that time, these patients really felt that nobody would listen to them. And even they felt that they could not speak with family and friends because the stigma, not just stigma around cancer, but stigma around advanced cancer or metastatic cancer, was so big that they were close to themselves. And so I look at that, and I was really, really touched and impressed by those 2 surveys. One was called Silent Voices, and the other one was the Bridge survey. And they are still available online for people to read. And so I look at that problem, I said, I want to do something, I want to change that. But it's such a huge problem. How do you tackle a problem like that? But if you think about it, at that time, about 1/3 of breast cancers, even if diagnosed earlier, even if treated properly, would have a relapse.
Right.
Today, this has decreased for about 20-25%. But at that time, it was 1/3. And there is, of course, some people that are diagnosed already with metastasis. Right. In high-income countries, in countries that have screening programs, that percentage is about 10-15%, and sometimes even lower. But in low-middle-income countries, this goes up to 60 or 80% because of the delay in diagnosis. So there is a huge number of people that are living with metastatic disease, and to live and feel that they are totally isolated and they have support from nobody, and that they are not listened. I wanted to change that.
I mean, there's enough to do already in high-income countries, right? And you've taken the step to be both an oncologist, someone who manages consortia and coalitions, to really get change happening in low and middle income countries. The disparities are huge already here. The disparities are even exacerbated in low and middle income countries. Are you seeing big changes in low and middle income countries in terms of how people, communities, societies, governments are viewing metastatic breast cancer?
I think so. I think this now almost 20 years that we've been around trying to change that. And we started with a small working group up until now that we are a very large coalition of organizations, because the ABC Global Alliance is like a federation. The members are organizations.
Right.
And we have more than 270 in more than 100 countries around the world. So we came from a very small group to a very large organization. And I think a lot has happened in these 20 years. Not everything, unfortunately, obviously, but at least the fact that people are being heard, that their needs are being put forward, and when those needs are different, and some of them are quite different from the early breast cancer setting, they also feel that they can be listened to. In fact, if we dissect the needs of these patients, we'll find that the needs of someone who has metastatic cancer, whatever, if it's breast or lung or melanoma or whatever, are similar than, for example, between early and metastatic breast cancer. And now we're starting to create a sort of movement of people that take care of different types of cancer, but understand the needs of people that live with metastatic or advanced cancer that is usually, in the majority of cases, incurable. So these needs are very specific,
right,
and we're starting to address that. And fortunately, the survival has also improved.
Right.
And I'm sure we'll go to the discussion of advances, but if survival improves, these people live long enough to have problems of survivorship,
right,
that we are used to call the word survivors for those who go through cancer and then go back to their normal life. Although the patient community doesn't like the word survivor, but nobody has yet come forward with a better word. I have this discussion quite often, and we say we don't like it, but we haven't come up with a better word. But what for me is really something amazing is that we are now talking about survivorship for metastatic patients, and so that means that we have come a long way. Now, you have asked me about the challenges of an oncologist. I think what is more heartbreaking for me currently is that I have to treat patients differently,
right,
according to what they are able to afford. So if I have a clinic day, right, and I see different people, and I practice in what is considered a high-income country,
right,
but people have different coverages, right? And if they are in Portugal has a similar system to the UK with a national health system. They have access to certain things, but not to everything. If they are in private practice and they have good insurance, they can have access to many more things. If they are in private practice, but they have a very low budget insurance, they are in the middle. And so sometimes you want to discuss with them the different options, and we feel obliged to discuss with patients the different options that exist. But then we have to say, unfortunately, we cannot give you this. And we will give you this, which is like, for example, second best choice. And I have to do that to consecutive patients that I see. And that, for me, is very painful because you're talking about the same country, so people should have the same rights, and yet they are treated differently according to what they can pay. I suppose this is what has been happening forever in the United States, for example. But for countries like mine and like the UK, where we used to have a national health system that was able to pay for the best treatment, and now we no longer can do that, and we can discuss the reasons why. That leads to this stress within the clinical practice.
So, I mean, we've seen this more and more, right? Working in sort of global societies, you hear a lot of people coming back to say the price of these medicines, of cancer treatments, well, many other products also, are just inhibitory for health systems, inhibitory for patients. Practitioners have to then make choices. When they do have choices, some practitioners do not even have any choices to work with because products are then not registered in countries, not even made available. And this has become such a global problem in the United States. In the UK, there was also recently a breast cancer drug that's not being made available because it cannot be afforded by the health system. So practitioners more and more have to make choices. And what are you starting to see in terms of the reliability of treatment? Because you've been addressing stigma. You've been addressing, ensuring that women have a voice. You're engaging the pharmaceutical industry. The ABC Global Alliance has engaged the pharmaceutical industry on this particular issue. Do you think they're listening? What do you think they should do to address these problems?
Well, I always feel, so two things maybe to explain. When I was a young physician, I used to listen to the generation before me say, I don't care about finances. I focus on science and the rest is not for me.
Right.
But I am from the generation where we could no longer say that because the financial, let's call it toxicity, the financial toxicity of what we prescribe affects directly what we can prescribe and the way we practice oncology.
Right.
So that let's say, mentality, I don't think it was helpful because for a long time, healthcare providers were on the side of this discussion. And a lot of decisions were made without listening to those who were in the real world, in the real practice. And that, of course, led to some wrong decisions being made. The other part I would like to address is that I do not also like the mentality that the pharmaceutical industry is the big bad wolf and that it's their fault, everything is their fault. Mm-hmm. I think they are part of the problem, not the entire problem, and they have to be part of the solution as well. And so they cannot be just looked at as a source of money, of funds, of new drugs, but they have to be looked at as what they are. They are a business. They behave like business. They have never hidden that, right? They don't have a hidden agenda. But they have also to realize that the business model that exists in healthcare is broken, and that we are moving very fast to the limit of this model. And when it breaks completely, everybody will lose, including the pharmaceutical industry. Yeah. And that's why I wanted the pharmaceutical companies to be members and not sponsors only of the ABC Global Alliance. I wanted them to have a seat at the table because the Global Alliance is exactly to sit everybody at the same table and listen to the different perspectives.
So the pharmaceutical industry are critical for innovating the next generation products, improving current generation products so that they are more accessible for patients globally. Many societies and countries rely on companies to register their products, make them available, keep the supply chains running. But at the same time, right now in a financial climate, many companies are also being looked at to sponsor studies, sponsor capacity building initiatives, invest in infrastructure, especially in countries that are not strong enough or don't have the full capabilities for care. So you've managed to, as part of the ABC Alliance, bring in a number of pharmaceutical companies in this relationship. So the industry is moving from a purely transactional sales relationship to being a partner. What does that partnership mean? Having them at the table, what does that mean for the industry, and why should they continue doing that?
I think it is important for them, and I believe that many of them, of course, there are good and bad in everything, but I believe that many of them understand that if they see the problem also from other people's eyes, from the eyes of the patient, but also from the eyes of the healthcare provider, from the eyes of the payers, and from the eyes of the regulators, and if all of us learn how to look at the problem from different perspectives, we may come up with some solution. When I say that the model is broken, is also, I always give this example. If I go and buy a car, and if I decide that I want a Ferrari, I know that I'm going to pay more, right? But I also know that I will have a better car. So I'm just, focusing on extremes. And if I go to buy a small car, the utility car, to go to run around a city with a lot of traffic, it's going to be of less quality, also less expensive. What is happening now is that the cost of a medicine is not related to the benefit. Okay, and this has been an ongoing fight, and there are different models. And one of the things that the ESMO, the European Society of Medical Oncology, and also the American Society of Clinical Oncology, ASCO, what they've tried to come up with objective scales to measure the benefit of a medicine. So this is called the ASCO Framework of Value and the ESMO Magnitude of Clinical Benefit Scale. Those are models. They can be criticized, but overall, and they are always people working on them to improve with statisticians, but they provide one way to classify the benefit that a certain treatment provides. And this allows countries, for example, to prioritize, to have a list of priorities. Because what we've came to understand when we started this work many years ago is that you take a low or a middle, let's not take the low yet, but the middle income country. And you see what are the cancer drugs available. And sometimes you see that drugs that provide a very important benefit are not available, while others that provide, debatable benefit are available. So who makes those choices, right? While if you have a scale, yes, we know it's not perfect scale, but if you have a scale, you can tell them, look, first you provide access to those who have the highest level in the scale, and then if you have funds, if you are in a country with more funds, you can go down the scale. Because for us, oncologists and for patients, it's important to have many different options of treatment. When we were telling that metastatic patients with metastatic cancer are living longer and longer,
right.
So they need more and more lines of treatment, right? So you need more options. But that does not mean that you're going to reimburse one that it's down the line and forget to reimburse the one that provides the biggest benefit.
So, but who makes the decisions today across the world, especially in low and middle income countries, right? Is it dependent on the industry makes it available? Whichever dossier makes it first is what's made available?
No, I don't think so. Well, each country has their own system.
Right. And it's quite fragmented, every country.
Very fragmented.
And which is why these systems, these frameworks, are helping to harmonize it, right?
Yes, because it also depends. So it depends who is paying for for health in a country, right? If you have a national health system, then your government or the organization defined by your government is the one that decides, I'm going to reimburse this and make it available, or I can't. And all that has to do with this cost effectiveness, that you look at the benefit and you look at the cost. And are you willing to pay that much for the benefit that it provides? And so that has been a long, long fight for me, that since when I started, to say that we should have survival as our goal.
Yes.
Right? But and that goes back to trial design and goes back to what is fastly achieved. So pharma wants to get their money back from their investment as fast as possible, right? Because there is also the problem of patents. So you have a certain number of years. And this is many of the reasons why the system is broken. So first, whatever new formulation is developed, sometimes even from universities, tell me who else besides the pharmaceutical industry is investing on taking that new entity, formulation, and develop a drug that can be given to patients?
No one.
No
Definitely
one.
not for oncology.
Right?
Yeah.
No one, because you cannot say, oh, they're the bad guys. Well, where are the other ones?
Yeah.
Right? So you need to invest. It's true that today, with the model that exists, you start, let's say, with 1,000 new formulations, and of those, maybe 10 will reach the clinical trial level, right? And then from those, perhaps 2, if you're lucky, 2 or 3 will reach phase 3, and perhaps 1 will be approved to be used. So that's the, let's say, the argument from pharma why they make it so expensive.
A large attrition rate.
Large attrition rate.
Right.
On the other hand, the way that clinical trials have evolved are totally against the needs of the patients, because they have been evolving to, let's focus on the end point that you can have the answer faster, not necessarily the one that will lead to a best outcome for
survival.
the patient, right? What will make a difference for the patient. Let's see what gives us the answer faster. And that is not just pharma. Academics want the same thing, because academics don't have the financial, let's say, argument, but they have their own career, and they want to see the results fast.
And you want to publish things fast.
Exactly.
Right?
So
Also.
everybody has their bias.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So it's not just pharma that has their bias. The academics also have their bias.
So redesigning clinical studies, making them definitely more aligned with the needs of patients.
But also less bureaucratic.
Less bureaucratic.
Because today, a big chunk of what the pharma has to invest is when they reach, it's not between those 1,000 to the 10, because that preclinical work, it's not so expensive as the clinical trials have become. And really for no good reason. The bureaucracy has almost killed academic research and has made the expenses of developing a drug so high that when it reached the clinic, they put too high prices. And that's why I'm saying the whole model is broken.
Right.
And everybody, the regulators, must be called to, how can I say this in a diplomatic way? They have to have their responsibilities as well. They cannot just, ignore
the increasing
link,
costs and
the link of what
bureaucracy.
they request that the trial has,
Right.
to then the cost that will lead for the treatment to have.
So are you saying in the ABC Global Alliance that the industry, health practitioners and patients are actually saying the same thing? That there is an agreement that everyone wants to fix the system?
Yes.
But there's definitely a problem in not necessarily knowing how to fix the system, because it's everybody's problem. Like, we have financing issues at a country level. We have an industry's incentive system which doesn't align with the outcomes that you're looking at. And at the end of it, practitioners are being put in the middle, making choices of what's available for their patients.
Yes, and I think if you take those three stakeholders, patients and patient advocates, the healthcare providers, and the pharma, I think we are quite a lot. In a lot of issues, we are aligned. Perhaps we have different ideas on the solutions, but I think we all understand the problems. Mm-hmm. But I think we are missing a couple of stakeholders to be able to really make the change, because none of these three have the power to make the changes that are needed. So we need the regulators, and usually perhaps with fear of being considered influenced or biased, they are very much isolated from all these discussions. We need also the policymakers, the politicians, the ones that take the decision of allocating funds. Mm-hmm. And the ones that take the decision on how complex a clinical trial has to be, right? And because it does not have to be so complex as it is today. On the other hand, I was telling you, a lot people have their own bias. And this fight that I've been having for decades now, to say that we have to aim higher for people that live with advanced cancer, or we will never make it a curable disease. There is an outcome called progression-free survival, right? And the way I explain to my patients, what does it mean, progression-free survival, which is a wrong name. We should not have survival there, because patients only listen to the last word. But if you have a drug that provides 3 months benefit in progression-free survival and no benefit in overall survival, what does that mean? Clearly and very bluntly, it means that you will die the same day. But 3 months, your disease, for a difference of 3 months, your disease will grow or not grow. Is that important or not?
Well, for the patient,
it depends. If that growth leads to symptoms, it is of course important. Yeah. But if that growth doesn't imply any symptom, it doesn't really matter, right? And a lot of metastases can grow quite some time before they give any symptom. Others are different. Just think about it. Something that grows in the abdomen, in your belly, can grow quite a lot, and not give you any symptoms. Something that grows in the brain is
going to give you
very
lots
different,
of symptoms,
right? So, is progression-free survival important? Yes. Should it be the only thing we aim for? No. Right? We have to aim to improve the duration and the quality of life of these patients. Otherwise, we'll never do that.
So there's a couple of findings that in our research with the pharmaceutical industry we've brought forward, right? One is improving access and expanding access. And that clearly has to be done in partnership, as we've just discussed. There's a lot to do in terms of ensuring cost-effective treatments are brought to the market. And we've been struggling with some of the advanced therapeutics that are there for metastatic cancer. Just to name a few examples, pembrolizumab, trastuzumab, deruxtecan are examples of products that have gone through quite heavy debates on cost effectiveness, availability, access, especially in low and middle income countries. Now, you were born in Mozambique, if I remember that correctly, right? So, what is the situation in sub-Saharan Africa? Is there an awareness that there are medicines and treatments available, and it's a long way away?
Oh yes.
And our governments, communities, gearing up to get access to these particular treatments? What are some of the advances that I think are important for us to mention here?
When you look at changing things in low-middle-income countries, you have to think as you need to rebuild the infrastructure of a building or a house. You cannot start by the roof, okay? So when you go and I have learned, I already knew that, but I have learned even deeper with the work that the ABC Global Alliance is doing with the Max Foundation. So we are collaborating together also with some pharma companies and with some other partners, diagnostic companies as well, on providing treatments of some of these new treatments to low, not low middle, low income countries. And what we have learned, that we already knew, but we have definitely learned even more, is not enough. You cannot just go there and drop the medicine.
No.
It doesn't work.
No.
Why? Because the whole infrastructure is not set up. So a woman that lives in sub-Saharan Africa, even if she lives in the capital, but imagine now those who live outside the capital, right? She feels a lump. Okay? Between the moment she feels the lump and the moment there will be a diagnosis, sometimes it goes to a year. Definitely, majority of times, 6 months. So between the moment of the symptom and the moment of diagnosis, you missed the opportunity from a curable cancer to an incurable cancer. Okay? There will be no drug, for more expensive that it is, that will cure that patient. But if we had shortened this time between symptom and diagnosis, we would have been able to cure her without an expensive drug, right? And then that's the first thing. Second thing that shows how sometimes decisions in low and low middle income countries are totally appalling. So the majority of these countries, pathology, so for doing the biopsy and analyzing the type of tumor, is not covered. It's out of pocket for the patient, and very often costs more than 1 month's wage.
So that disincentivizes anyone from even going for...
No, they can't. They can't afford, right? But on the other hand, for example, we have done some work in Kenya, and we have found out that the government is paying for follow-up with PET scans, which is something is not recommended by guidelines, but it doesn't pay for pathology.
Right. So you're missing a fundamental part of the patient's journey.
Exactly. And without you knowing what type of cancer, you cannot decide what type of treatment you need. Then the other part is all these new target expensive drugs, they are given, or almost all, in combination with what we say old traditional, either endocrine therapy or chemotherapy, which we go back to a problem we haven't mentioned, but it's a crucial problem of what we call essential medicines, right? So there is for those who don't know, but there is a list, and it's a list developed by WHO together with the experts in the field of what we consider to be essential medicines for treating the all different diseases. And we're talking about oncology, so there is also a list of essential medicines in oncology. The vast majority are inexpensive, okay? Treating breast cancer, the most important treatment is tamoxifen, a drug that comes from the 70s that costs nothing. And do you know that I was without tamoxifen in Portugal for over 6 months in 2024?
But how can that be? Is it just not produced anymore?
Exactly.
Because it's...
So all these, now imagine in Mozambique, in my country, they have 1 month they have tamoxifen, for 6 months they don't.
So reliability of supply of the entire spectrum of products that you actually need.
Of inexpensive drugs. Why this happens? Because they do not provide a lot of benefit, right? You don't sell, you don't gain a lot of money, so there is no incentive to produce, and then the distributors distribute the one that exists to the country you pay more.
Right.
So, for example, my colleagues in Germany never had shortage of tamoxifen.
No, it's a large market. It's an attractive market.
Right. But so we've been discussing a lot of times, and some of the pharma have come forward and say, we are willing to produce the inexpensive drugs For that, we need certain conditions.
Right.
So, for example, if you do a procurement of just a small country like Portugal, it's not enough. So the whole Europe, and that's why I'm telling you that who takes the decisions is too far away from the reality. Politicians and policymakers should listen to us. It's time for the whole Europe to function as one and say, we need these drugs, these inexpensive drugs. So we are going to make the procurement together, all the European Union countries. That is a big market, right? And we're going to give you a contract, not for 1 or 2 years, but a contract for 5 years or 10 years, so that it's worthwhile your investment in the factories to produce these medicines.
And in that way, engage a lot of the generic medicine manufacturers
but
also
also
to produce
the
large ones.
and we could say, okay, you want to sell this new expensive drug, okay, but we will accept, but you commit to produce this inexpensive drug that has to go with your expensive drug, and you produce it in a way that there is no shortage around the world. That's one model, right?
Yeah, to coordinate and pool that procurement.
Exactly.
In order for the entire spectrum of...
And when I talk about this with pharma, they say, but we said we would do it, but if you make us... if you give us a contract just for 2 years, it's not worthwhile, because then what do we do to the
factory
that we produced? So, for example, the U.S. government and the Indian government came to an agreement, because, as you know, there are many genetic factories in India, and they've come to an agreement of, okay, you for quite a long number of years, you will produce the genetics that are needed in the U.S. It's one way to overcome that. And I think that Europe should do the same.
And at the end, you do want to see that balance of equity, right? You do want to make sure that all the countries are actually working very closely together on understanding where are the real needs, where are the serious shortages, which groups need to pool the procurement systems together and coordinate the procurement in order to make products available, and at the same time invest in infrastructure development, and at the same time reimburse across the whole continuum of care for a patient. Yeah. So there's a lot of things to solve.
A lot before you even go to the immunotherapy and antibody drug conjugates. That's the roof of the house. But if you don't have the rest of the house well structured, there's no way you can do it. All this that we are talking, what does it translate to the patient?
Right.
So what happens in Mozambique very often, the most frequent type of breast cancer is what we call hormonal dependent. It's about 2/3 of breast cancer. The most important type of treatment is endocrine therapy. All the endocrine therapy agents, particularly the oral ones, are the old ones are inexpensive. But because they are essential medicines, but they are in shortage, a woman in Mozambique will more often be treated with chemotherapy than with endocrine therapy. So not only is more toxic and less effective, right?
And then the costs associated with that are also higher.
Side effects, management of side effects, incapacity sometimes to work.
When if you take care for your family.
Care for your family. When if you take endocrine therapy, you can continue to do your normal work. Second thing that we sometimes forget, all these new agents have side effects, all of them. This idea that we had maybe 10, 15 years ago, that everything that it's targeted doesn't have side effects is a wrong idea.
Right.
They have different side effects, right? But for that, you need supportive measures. Okay, what I learned in traveling within low and low middle income, but especially low, these supportive measures, like for example, medication against nausea and vomiting, again exists 1 month, 6 months does not exist. So my colleagues have to prescribe chemotherapy without any of those supportive measures.
Right.
Okay? So that is like what we used to do in the 70s,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So nothing. Imagine the suffering of the patients. And so if we think that all that matters is one expensive drug, let's take immunotherapy. Everything can go well with immunotherapy or can go very badly with very severe side effects. So how do you manage if you don't have supportive medicines to help? How do you take care of your patient when the side effects appear?
So a lot of times the coalitions have to educate different organizations and stakeholders to get them to understand the different types of solutions. Long-term contracts, having industry, having regulators, having practitioners, patient advocates, and governments at the table so that everyone understands not only the problems but also the potential solutions. I think is one of the key components of finding ways to bridge this gap. How do we prevent that the pharmaceutical industry sees that there's so many things that need to be solved, that there's so many problems? So a lot of times you're seeing a lot of pharmaceutical companies saying, okay, we can't invest, we can't be the only ones investing in solving these particular problems. So how do you prevent a sort of a twiddling of the thumbs and of different stakeholders just waiting for the others to solve the problem?
Well, I wish I knew. I wish I knew. I think the only message that I can give to all of them is that there is no doubt, and the signs are everywhere, from low-income to high-income countries, that the system is getting to a situation of not being bearable anymore in any country, right? Not even in the United States, that everybody thinks that people have access to everything, which is not true. But it's not possible to continue this way. And so either we start working together, and I believe that different stakeholders have different responsibilities, and we try all together to find a model that that will be, in the end, hopefully, the best for the patient, and that will probably mean that some stakeholders will have to lose some benefits that today they have, but they will gain others. And maybe if they don't look so short-term, if they look long-term, they will see that in the end the benefit will be more. And I am more concerned sometimes with politicians and policymakers than with pharma, because I know that pharma understands that investments are sometimes long-term. But politicians, they want to be elected, right? And so they think short-term on their 5 years that they are in government or even less, right? And they forget that these are problems will not be solved in 5 years. It will take all the politicians, no matter from which field, to be in agreement on how we can change the system for it to become sustainable, right? And I would like also to address one point that I have this fight over and over and over again with my colleagues. So one of the things we have done to try to change the outcome of advanced breast cancer was to create guidelines, recommendations. At the time when we created the ABC guidelines, there was no good guideline to treat metastatic breast cancer. There was a guideline for early breast cancer, but not for metastatic.
Anywhere, globally.
Globally.
Right.
It's very rare. Some, small things, but not of high quality. And when I look at the problem that was so big, I said, okay, let's look at what happened in early breast cancer. And in early breast cancer, when you see the curves of mortality from the 90s, in all high-income countries, you see a huge drop in mortality, more than 30%.
Oh.
Okay? So if we think, okay, what happened for that drop in mortality? And for us to see things in a population base, you have to go back at least 10 years, 10 to 15 years. So what have we done 10, 15 years before? And then you go to the late 70s, beginning of the 80s. And that was the time where screening programs started. awareness, fighting the stigma, and so that leads to early detection. Even if you don't do screening, at least you have early detection. Not all cancers have screening, right? But you can have education, awareness, and early detection. And that was the years also of developing of tamoxifen and the first chemotherapy, right? And so at that time, when those treatments were developed, there was a change in mentality, thinking that cancer was a local disease. And you had to do very extensive surgery, very aggressive radiotherapy, and then people would have a relapse and die anyway. So they understood that breast cancer was not a local disease, and cancer is not a local disease. It's a systemic disease, and that's what kills you, is when they spread.
When it spreads.
Right? And so you need to work as a team. And the multidisciplinary care in oncology started there, on understanding that you need a surgery, you need a surgeon, you need a radiation oncologist, you need a medical oncologist, you need many other, you need a pathologist, an imaging expert. And the multidisciplinarity and the treatment according to the guidelines was the two main things that changed and led to that drop in mortality. So that's what we fought to bring to the metastatic setting. But when we look at the world globally, we can develop the best set of guidelines. And today you have many guidelines. But then my colleagues in Mozambique and in Kenya and other countries say, I look at these guidelines, but 90% of what is here, I can't do it.
For financial reasons? For capacity?
For both.
Right.
So what do I do?
How do I get a multidisciplinary team if I only have a few available?
So what we do with the ABC guidelines, and we work with different people in different regions, we work to adapt the guidelines to the resources. And there are others that have tried that as well. The Global Breast Cancer Initiative, something that doesn't exist anymore but existed for a long time, led by Ben Anderson, that we develop a model to have resource stratified guidelines. And CCN is working also on efforts to do this resource stratified guidelines. And we also adapt the ABC guidelines to the resources.
And do you see a lot of countries taking this up? And do you see change at the country level?
So there are two ways of facing this. And both from the low-income countries and the high-income countries. Some people say, oh, no, that means that you accept less than optimal treatment for certain patients. And say, no, it means that you have a priority, and you say, your best option is this. But if you can't have it, your second best option is this.
It provides choices.
Provides
options.
choices and also a priority in choices. Because what happened when I started back in the early 2000s is that the mentality was, well, metastatic cancer is incurable, so I can do whatever I want. And I don't need to follow guidelines. Right? And so, and that was something extremely bad for the patients. Is what we some call instead of evidence-based medicine, eminence-based medicine. And so, one of the things we fought for is no, it's not right. You cannot do what you think is best. You have to do what the evidence tells you.
And coordinating that obviously is also provides an incentive for partners who are looking for regulation, stability, harmonization to engage in this, right? So this is of benefit for the pharmaceutical industry, for regulators, for governments, and to have a harmonized approach.
I really believe that if there is a stakeholder besides the patients and the advocates that really likes the guidelines are the pharma industry. Right?
And they contribute to.
Because if you have a good drug, and if you have proven that it has an impact and a meaningful benefit, it will make it to the guidelines. But those that make the guidelines are sometimes with the ones with which I have the biggest fights, because you cannot just put in the guideline just a list of everything that exists.
No.
That doesn't help.
No.
Right? You have to say, okay, this is your best option based on available science, magnitude of benefit. Okay, this is your priority. then for some reason you cannot have it. What is your second best? And what is your third best? And what is that you should not use? And you should not prescribe, and you should not spend money on it. And that's the role of a guideline. But up until today, there are a lot of struggle also from the academic part on not listing everything.
As you said, everyone has a different incentive
and
different motivations and their different biases.
And then I don't understand why we put in the guidelines treatments that we have come to the conclusion that they provide 2 weeks benefit.
Right. What does that bring to any patient?
Right?
Yeah. So if we're speaking directly to decision makers in healthcare, whether they're talking about governments or the pharmaceutical industry, what would you urge them to do differently when it comes to addressing the needs of women and women's health situations?
Well, there is one thing we haven't spoken too much about it, and that's women's rights.
Mm-hmm.
And usually one thing is related to the healthcare as well, right? And we live in a period in time that, if anything, we are going back regarding women's rights.
Globally.
Right. Yes. So there were, a couple of years ago, I was awarded the Women for Oncology Award, and I decided to give a talk that had very little to do with breast cancer, but just looking at women's rights and the impact of all that in healthcare and breast cancer. And what I came to the conclusion by looking at the world is that it took us women centuries sometimes to achieve some rights: the right to vote, the right to speak, the right to decide about our own health.
And options.
Yeah. And not having to rely on either a father or a husband to decide for us. But in many countries, that is going back again, right? In the United States, the decision about going back on the right of abortion.
Yeah.
And we're not going to talk about if I'm in favor or against, or if you're in favor or against. It's not what is here for us to discuss. Everybody has their right to their beliefs and views. But it's very different that if it's in the law, that you do not have the right to do something if that's your choice, right? And the consequences of that are huge. And I'm not going to speak about the consequences for the women and the children that come out of that. I'm going just to focus on what relates to the breast cancer. Mm-hmm. So there is something that is on the rise, which is diagnosis of cancer during pregnancy.
Right.
Because women are having kids later, right? And cancer in young people are increasing as well. So these two situations means that we have more cases of cancer diagnosed during pregnancy. For breast cancer, in the majority of cases, we are able to treat the mother without having to have an abortion and safeguarding the child as well. But there are some situations where there is not possible. And there are cancers where there is not possible or very, very difficult, like gynecological cancers, leukemias. So in those situations, my colleagues in those states, they are not able to help the woman to have an abortion, or they will lose the right to practice, or they go to prison, or they have a huge fine.
So
what they're going to do, abandon the woman who has cancer and is pregnant?
So women then die.
Women die.
The baby dies anyway.
Yeah.
The entire family is devastated because of the lack of rights.
Exactly.
Which used to exist.
Yeah. And if you look at everything else, what happened in Afghanistan, in a few months, women lost the entire rights that they had been...
Education, health, everything.
Everything, right? So when we look at the rights of women, we are going back. And we know now with the new administration that a huge number of rights and rights regarding disparities, whatever they are, gender, race, financial, socioeconomic, all that, that is going back many decades even. So there was a publication from WHO that said that if we keep doing the things we are doing, and this was before the Trump administration, if we keep doing the things we are doing and the pace of things we are doing, we will need 286 years until we reach gender equity.
Wow.
So almost 3 centuries. So we have to make things different, right? Otherwise, there will never be this equity. And as we started, I think a lot of our rights are going back, and we are losing them, and the disparities are increasing instead of decreasing. And I think all of us should take a moment and think, where is society heading?
Right. So at the end, all the stakeholders, individuals within the stakeholder groups, need to advocate for better rights for women, better, broader access where solutions do exist. There's been a lot of advancements in developing the solutions. We need to now spread that wider and act on these issues.
And each of them have their own responsibilities. There are things that pharma can do. For example, it is not right that a simple pill costs $10,000 a month. It's very different if you're talking about a monoclonal antibody, an antibody drug conjugate that is very expensive to produce. A pill is not expensive to produce, right?
Right.
So there's nothing that can justify that price, right? On the other hand, those who are responsible have to decrease the cost of clinical research.
Right.
Otherwise, it's not possible.
And that is spread out across multiple stakeholders
Yes.
in reducing that cost.
Absolutely. On the other hand, if prescribers take more responsibility and say, I am not going to prescribe a drug that provides 2 weeks benefit or 2 months benefit and costs millions, I'm not going to prescribe even if my patient has access, because somebody is paying, the society is paying. So I'm not going to use that. I'm going to look at the drugs that really provide the benefit. And I don't see my colleagues doing that in the majority of cases. So, and also the patients, we always say that they have to keep fighting and the advocates have to keep fighting, but we can also not put all the burden on them.
We are all advocates.
Yes, and we are all potential patients. So,
or caregivers.
Currently, in Europe, 1 out of 3 Europeans will have at least 1 cancer in their lifetime. Very soon, in about 10 years, something like that, it will be 1 out of 2. So we are all potential cancer patients. Right?
So there's a lot to do and a lot to advocate for. Thank you, Fatima. So in conclusion, I wanted to ask, what is your main message to listeners and viewers of this health equity podcast? They can be, of course, members from the pharmaceutical industry, government, people, members of the community, investors, government officials, policymakers.
Well,
what's your one message to them on addressing the gender equity gap?
Today, I think that the most frequent words that you listen in oncology is patient-centered, and in medicine in general. But I think it has become those words that you say without thinking of what it really means, right? And what I would ask is that really the decisions that people take in their daily life, the big decisions, the smaller decisions, that they are really, really and truly patient-centered. Because if they do that, then they will stop the wasting. They will stop making decisions that increase the gaps. not just the socioeconomic gaps, but also the gender gaps. And they will really start to think of the patients first. And that goes for everybody, including the physicians.
Right. And I have to ask this one question. What keeps you going, knowing that there's this many problems to solve, and yet many motivated people around you who are willing to collaborate on these issues? What keeps you going?
You know, the work that I do with the ABC Global Alliance is what keeps me going, because, and usually more on low middle income countries, because it's where you find that people are more grateful, that they understand that there is a new reality that is out there, and that if we work together, we would be able to reach. I think maybe because I've been going through some difficult part, I'm a little bit disappointed with the new generation of healthcare providers, of politicians, of policymakers that are all very self-centered. They use the words patient-centered, but they are really not thinking about the patient.
It's extremely frustrating.
Yes.
To have advances, solve a lot of problems,
And
but at the
then-
same time still see that, as the generations go on, things are getting more and more difficult.
If people would think that what we have achieved in this last 2 decades is only reaching, at best, 10% of cancer patients in the world, so who takes care of the other 90? So that's what keeps me going.
So for all listeners out there and people watching this this podcast, it is up to you to act and
Yes.
engage in this. As a patient advocate, as an advocate, as someone who actually has a role in a pharmaceutical company, in regulation, in government, in
As a
investments,
physician,
as a
nurse.
as a nurse, to really act on this particular issue and speak up for women all around the world who have a right to access proper healthcare. Thank you, Dr. Fatima.
Thank you.
In today's podcast, we have discussed how it's important to raise awareness of the needs of women and girls in accessing healthcare, especially for cancer care. We've also discussed the role of different stakeholders, including the pharmaceutical industry, in stepping up their actions to collaborate and act on bridging those inequities that exist today globally in high-income countries and in low and middle-income countries in addressing access to cancer care. We've also discussed practical insights that have been developed by the work of Dr. Fatima and her partners in developing solutions that can be really used by different communities, by governments, by the pharmaceutical industry. Very clear solutions on what you can do to act on this. I hope this humanizes the conversation by making everyone aware that this is an issue that cannot wait. We're on a slippery slope right now in addressing health equity and gender equity. We're on a slippery slope in addressing the rights of women, but we can do something about this. Thank you very much for listening and watching this podcast.